Welcome to State of the State, the monthly roundup of policy and research for the state of Michigan, brought to you by the Institute of Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University and Russ White and our friends here at MSU Radio Studios. I'm Arnold Weinfeld, Associate Director for the Institute, and joining me today is our co-host and Institute Director, Dr. Matt Grossman, and economist, Dr. Charlie Ballard. Our guest today will be Nick Pidgeon, Director of the Michigan Campaign Finance Network. The network is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to assist the public in understanding the role of contributions to politicians through transparent, timely, and fact-based research and analysis. We will be discussing the recently passed financial disclosure legislation passed by the Michigan legislature. And speaking of the Michigan legislature, they broke uncharacteristically early for the year. Left before Thanksgiving or just after Thanksgiving. Why'd that happen, Matt?
Yeah, we got a very long holiday break here at our full-time legislature. The immediate cause was the lack of giving immediate effect to legislation that they wanted to pass before the Democratic presidential primary, the exciting contest between Joe Biden and other that is to take place in the spring. And in order to get that done in time, they had to break early. But, of course, as we've been previewing, they waited on the election results when the Democratic majority lost two seats temporarily to mayoral election victors, and that left the House chamber evenly split, which is not as good for passing additional legislation. So the trade-off there was get that presidential primary early and not have to deal with that 50-50 legislature for a little bit versus try to trudge through, and they decided to go early.
So as you noted, two things happened there. One was the need to adjourn early, so legislation such as not just the presidential primary, but the earned income tax credit, the reduction in retiree tax benefits, all of those would go into effect with some immediacy before the end of the year. But then we do have that complication now of where the House Democrats lost two seats to candidates, to representatives who wound up winning their mayoral election. So now, as you noted, it's 54-54, and there's some rumors floating around the Capitol that the House, at least, will be taking an extended break. The governor has moved that we have special elections in late winter and early spring. What are your thoughts or perspective if the legislature were to take an even more extended break going into the new year? Any implications for the Democrats as we move into an election year?
Well, we should keep in mind that Michigan meets an abnormally long amount of time for legislatures nationwide. I was just in Indiana, where there's only an internship program in the spring because there's only a legislature really going in the spring. Of course, I also just visited Texas recently, where they only come every 2 years for a few months unless they are extended by the governor. So it's not abnormal to have to put all of your work into a smaller amount of time. And the Democrats have had one of the most productive years that we've seen in the legislature in terms of passing legislation in a long time. So a slowdown won't necessarily hurt them politically, I don't think, although, of course, it does give Republicans an easy political message to say that they gave up and went home.
And
the do-nothing Democrats.
The do-nothing Democrats. Any thoughts? It comes to my mind, and I hate to put it on the table, but you see any calls for a part-time legislature coming out of this?
Well, immediately I got a call from a reporter on the day the legislature closed that the Republicans were reintroducing this proposal to be timed well with this decision to say, well, if you don't need it this year, why do we need to come every year all of the time? So those will come up. I don't know, how much traction that will gain, but as a political message, it certainly works for the moment.
Now, Charlie, despite the political comings and goings, the economy seems to be doing fairly well. I don't even feel like we've had a soft landing. We just keep moving along here. So even though the Democrats might have some political issues here in Michigan, can they move forward with a platform of saying, hey, the economy's in great shape?
Well, certainly the Biden campaign is running TV ads now saying about we're creating a lot of jobs and various other things. We've commented on this more than once, that to the pleasant surprise of me and a lot of other economists, this economic cycle, the American economy has been remarkably resilient despite strong efforts by the Federal Reserve to slow things down. And the economy continues to grow. Inflation has not stopped, but it has moderated very significantly relative to what it was not that many months ago. Part of the good news here, I mean, how can you make all these things happen at once? One reason is that productivity has done pretty well. Worker productivity has been increasing at a pretty fast clip in the last year or so. And that gives you a little bit of extra room because then your economy can grow and you don't have to have the pressure on prices that comes when there are too many dollars chasing too few goods. So overall, a pretty good picture. And with Democrats as the incumbent party, you would think that would be good for them. And yet public opinion surveys suggest that a lot of voters are still pretty grumpy about the economy. The Economist looks at the numbers and says, hey, inflation has moderated a great deal. Joe and Jane Sixpack say, prices are still pretty high. So whether this is a good news for the incumbent party is, I guess we'll find out in about 11 months.
Well, as you noted, perception is everything. In terms of prices being high, I got gas for $2.99 the other day.
Gasoline is way down, and that's one of the prices that people pay the most attention to because it's just about the only price where, as you drive down the street, you see these gigantic signs showing the numbers, and it's something that most of us use regularly. So that's good news in terms of consumer attitudes. People are going to notice that.
Now, I will say today I drove by and it's back up to $3.27, and it just fascinates me. Years ago, we used to hear a lot of noise when gas prices moved 5 or 10 cents a day. Now they move 25 cents a day and nobody says anything. Fascinating to me how that's gone, how the American public has gotten used to quickly rising or lowered gas prices.
Well, that's right, and gas prices are much more volatile than most other prices. There's a lot of stickiness in a whole lot of markets that keeps the prices from changing very much. Gasoline is not one of those. It responds very quickly to changes in either supply or demand. And at least one piece of good news is that I don't hear so much anymore what people used to say, well, gas prices always go up and they never come down. They go up and they come down, and then they go up and then they come down.
You talked a lot about the national economy here. I'd like to talk about Michigan's economy because the perception is that we're still not doing very well, especially when one of the more recent initiatives of the governor is this Grow Michigan Council that leaves one with the impression, that we're getting older, we're getting poorer, and there's enough evidence to certainly back that up. And as we see some initial reports from the work of that group, it looks like we're already breaking down into our partisan camps with recommendations that will call for more investment in education and other areas, which of course means raising taxes. And we should stop really beating around the bush and just call it what it is. But how do you see Michigan's economy in all of this in the next 6 months to a year?
I see Michigan's economy in the next 6 months to a year in the same light that I have seen it for decades. We prospered phenomenally with the boom of manufacturing and autos in particular back in the middle of the 20th century. And in the last several decades, we haven't done nearly as well. We have the states that have done best in this century are the states with highly educated populations. You look at Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, California. Michigan is below the national average in measures of educational attainment. And autos used to be a quarter of our economy. Now autos is 6% of our economy. And unlike Wyoming and North Dakota and Alaska, we can't lean on a whole lot of oil and coal and gas wealth. And unlike New York and New Jersey, we can't lean on Wall Street. So we, in 2022, we were 38th among the 50 states in per capita personal income. And our population, as we noted in a recent podcast, our population has been essentially flat in the 21st century. We're not poor, but we haven't grown as rapidly as other states. That's just true. And I think all of these efforts to grow Michigan make sense to me, but it's not going to be fixed by next Tuesday. These are long-term issues with an aging population, with an economy that depends heavily on manufacturing, which has been in relative decline for 60 or 70 years. You don't fix those immediately. This is a long-term issue.
Matt, I'd love to get your perspective. You just noted that you've traveled recently to Indiana and Texas. You have colleagues across the country. You're also a small business owner yourself. How do you see our economy as compared to other states or what your colleagues are facing across the country?
Well, as Charlie said, most of the phenomenon are structural between states in terms of population and economics. The research that I reviewed shows no real relationship between state partisanship and economic outcomes or any obvious policy levers and changes to states' policy trajectories and population trajectories or economic trajectories. So maybe if we gave them decades, we might get some difference, but there is no kind of easy fix there, and most of the things are kind of structurally built in. I do think politically it's interesting how big the disconnect is. First of all, on the national economy, as Charlie said, consumer sentiment is still lower than it should be according to basic economic statistics. Even at the state level, what you see is that state officials are actually doing better in terms of public approval than you would think from their public judgments of the economic performance of the state relative to other states. So there's kind of a disconnect now between the economic factors and the political factors. Interestingly, that is true worldwide. So the good news, if you're Joe Biden, you can say, well, Joe Biden's approval is low, but not that low according to international factors. The economy here is bad, but not that bad according to international factors. The bad news is incumbent parties are losing everywhere, left and right. If you were around,
mostly left, right, over in Western Europe.
But not only. If you were in charge in this post-COVID economy, you are losing ground in elections almost worldwide, and that mirrors something that happened after the Great Recession as well. Whoever was in power at the time lost as a result. So, good news is for Biden is he's looking a little bit better than his, for example, he actually has the highest approval rating in the G8. Wow. Looking great relatively. But bad news is all those people are losing in the elections that have been held so far.
Yeah, if you can compare yourself to Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron, you're things
good.
are great. Yeah.
That's fascinating. The highest approval rating in the G8. Any way around that for these folks that are, see what's going on? I mean, President Biden obviously sees what's happening around the rest of the world. If you were his consultant, what would you tell him?
That's why we're in the business of just researching rather than actually trying to tell them what to do. Because as Charlie said, they're running some ads to try to talk up the economy. But if you do that, you run the risk of people saying you're out of touch. If you do the opposite and you say things aren't great, here are all of the things that we still need to do, then people say, why haven't you done them? You're in charge. So it doesn't leave a great message as the incumbent, other than the other guy's worse, which is what we're going to see.
Well, and with that, I think we'll move on to our guest now, Nick Pigeon, as I noted.
Not the other guy. No.
As I noted, Nick is director of the Michigan Campaign Finance Network. He's also a MSU graduate and a former fellow of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research. Nick, welcome to the program. Why don't you tell us a bit about your organization and in particular the views and perspective on the recently passed financial disclosure legislation?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Well, the Michigan Campaign Finance Network started in 1996, as you opened up with the goal of getting information to the voters, specifically about campaign finance and looking into matters related to, how our legislators are raising money. And we feel that a transparent legislature and giving the most amount of information to the public better serves them when they're making a decision in the polls, as we've been talking about this coming November, and when they are making their decisions in the polls. And as you were talking about, there was this issue last election. Voters had to vote on Proposal 1, right? And Proposal 1 passed 66% of the vote. That said, listen, Michigan and Idaho are the only two states that don't have a law that forces our legislators to have to disclose their personal finances. And so Proposal 1 passes 66% of the vote, which we talked about. There's not many things that pass or that 66% of Michiganders agree on. But they agree on having our legislators having to disclose, where their personal sources of income come from. And so the Campaign Finance Network has been tracking this since January. And the legislature really has not addressed this issue, and it was the last thing they had addressed in this session. We were talking about them ending session early, and at 2:30 in the morning, I think it was before or a little bit after Thanksgiving, as you mentioned, this is the last thing that they addressed, having to pass this bill. So there were two packages that were kind of being circulated. So there was the one backed by leadership, Senate Bills 613 through 616. That were sponsored by Senators Moss and Singh, and there was another version that was being backed by a few members not in leadership in the House, Representative Skaggs, Representative Burns, that kind of went a little bit further, specifically with this issue that a lot of journalists and a lot of people have been speaking about spousal disclosure, right? So in the law that was passed and that leadership backed, assets could be transferred to a spouse pretty easily, and there were many exemptions when it came to how, if the spouse was the only person that had control over an asset, how much of that would have to be disclosed by the legislator himself or herself. They gavelled down a lot of amendments that were in that bill that kind of went further. And there was not really any discussion on the floor, for this legislation that a lot of people in the state cared about. And, we've been tracking this since the beginning of the year. And, as it was passed, this bill kind of falls short to many other states.
So it took the legislature a year to enact a bare minimum of what 66% of the voters of the state of Michigan approved last November. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I would say so. And to be fair, right, all they had to do was pass a bill that did meet the minimums that were in Proposal 1. But, and to be fair again, there were a few things that went further, right? So the original Proposal 1 did not require these standards in that people running for office, that they would have to fill out the same disclosure form. So they did add that. There's some representatives that argue, well, listen, now we're extending this to the people who are trying to take our seat, and there's that whole discussion. And there was no spousal disclosure requirement in the original Proposal 1 language. But there were a lot of people voicing concerns about how far this went. There is the fine for knowingly filing an inaccurate report is, I believe, $1,000. And there's not really any other repercussions. There was discussion of making it so a legislator couldn't be seated if they didn't fill out their forms. There's not much teeth to the spill, and there wasn't any time for it to be on the floor and for people to discuss it.
So beforehand, we were 48th in the nation, as I understand it, in financial disclosure. This moves us to 40th, 47th. I mean, it doesn't seem like we've gone very far in requiring some things that other states have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, I've been asked a few times to say, okay, well, now we were 48th,
right.
and there was a few, a lot of the transparency organizations have put us pretty dead last compared to the rest of the country. I'm not sure where this puts us, in rankings of transparency. What I do know is that this law, a lot of the things that are in it are weak compared to the rest of the country. I mean, our legislators won't have to put a dollar amount on, how much they're making from different sources of earned and unearned income. In many other states, there will be a categorical disclosure, right? So I made $5,000 to $25,000 from this certain source. All our representatives will have to do is say, okay, if I made $1,000 or more from this source, here's the name of that, here's the contact information, and that's it.
Yeah, just a little story. I think I told Matt this. I moved a few years ago, and so we're still shedding, and I found a box of binders, and it was nearly every memo I'd written when I was a staffer on the House Democratic Policy staff. And lo and behold, 30 years ago, as term limits was approaching, I had a series of memos to leadership about financial disclosure and how maybe if we move forward on some financial disclosure, we may be able to mute some of the growing discontent amongst the public. And yet, here we are 30 years later, passing the bare minimum. Here we are 30 years later, adjourning early, maybe not meeting until, I don't know, special elections are held in the House. It's been known to say history repeats itself. So it will be interesting to see how this current situation between passing a bare minimum on financial disclosure, between adjourning early and maybe not coming back to do the people's business until late winter or early spring, impact the mood of the public going into the November elections.
So I think the theme here is that in Michigan things change very gradually. The economy is moving ahead at a gradual pace, and financial transparency for our legislators is moving at a I guess I would say glacial pace is what it sounds like. Although maybe the glacier moved a little bit faster this year.
Well, let me play devil's advocate a little bit and ask if it's really true that transparency is going to have those benefits that Arnold claimed 30 years ago, that we think it's going to help the public see government in action, but the history is not so good there. A lot of times when we pass things that show the public what's going on in government, they actually, trust in government goes down. We see more negative news stories citing things happening in government that look suspicious. So why is this a good trend that we should hope for more transparency if it's going to give us a bunch of negative news articles and more reasons to hate politicians?
Sure. No, absolutely. And that's something I've kind of considered. I mean, here at the network, we always believe that just more transparency is better, and that giving voters the information they need to properly engage as an electorate is just always better on its face. There's a lot of questions about what this disclosure is going to look like. I mean, the bill was pretty mum about specifics on. Listen, the Secretary of State, they're in charge of making these available online, and really the only enforcement mechanism in this law is that complaints can be made in regards to these filings by the public. These are furnished online. We don't know how they're going to be how they're going to be furnished online or how available they're going to be. And then the public makes a complaint, and then the Secretary of State has to respond to that. If the only thing that we're going to see from this, if people aren't paying attention to, the good disclosures, right? Or people, our representatives are, doing these disclosures and they're filing them on time, but the only thing that we pay attention to are, okay, well, we found this complaint and this person didn't do it right, like you're saying. Just that one example could make the public, feel less good about their legislators in Lansing just because of one error in someone's complaint form.
And of course, there's still the issue on the table, the Freedom of Information Act, and how the legislature and the administration, executive administration, are exempt from many of the things that others are not. That's been an ongoing issue. Democrats have said, they want to fix that, and yet here we are 1 year into the Democratic majority, and that's still sitting out there. Is the Campaign Finance Network involved in any discussions on FOIA or any of your other organizations that you partner with?
We're not too focused on the FOIA matter. It is a part of this ethics legislation, this ethics package that we've been tracking, and I've spoken to a few people about it. We in terms of what we've been hearing from the legislature and leadership in particular, about this set of bills and about FOIA is that they're going to do more, in the upcoming session. Well, if you're not forced to, and this is the kind of initiative that we've seen so far with the transparency legislation, we're not so sure what we'll see, and we already have, not a lot of time in the legislature for discussions to be happening. We'll have to see what happens.
And Matt, picking up on your perspective, it would, if I was a legislator, I might sit back and say, what difference does it make? Why should I pass legislation to make our finances more open, or to make the process more transparent? Because you seem to be indicating it doesn't make a difference. People still think that they're all crooks and they're all hiding something.
Well, people do make distinctions between politicians still, even though we might think that you can do anything. That there are still some people do still lose political ground from scandals, including financial scandals, and the press still does uncover real scandals, as does the judicial system. So there is some measure of accountability, and these kinds of processes can help with that. But the dream that transparency was going to lead to a more satisfied public, I think that has come and gone, and we shouldn't expect that.
I will say this. I know that one of the arguments as to more robust financial disclosure here in the state of Michigan among state legislators in particular, is that we really haven't had a scandal involving bribery or those kinds of things amongst our state legislators. Not that I'm aware of. Among current, that is correct. Once they left, the former speaker, once he left, felt he still needed to be involved. But not while they were here. So
well, as far as we know.
Thank you, Charlie. And on that note, we will once again leave our suspicions to our audience and thank Nick for his work and for being here with us today. Any other thoughts, Charlie or Matt, as we move into a new year?
Well, I'll toss out one. You mentioned taxes. I have heard that there is a group that's trying to get signatures on a ballot initiative that would eliminate the property tax in Michigan and make it very difficult to make up any of those $17 billion a year of lost revenue. So if that passes, say goodbye to roads and schools. That's my judgment. And then there's a case that's being a federal case that's being heard before the Supreme Court today about which, if the court rules in favor of the plaintiffs, the federal government would have to give billions and billions of refunds of taxes that they collected a few years ago, and so we're how much debt did the federal government issue last year? Something like $2 trillion, and debt to GDP ratio is the highest that it's been since the end of the Second World War. But we're cutting taxes, which those who know me know that's not what I think is sound fiscal policy, but there you are.
Well, Matt, as we move into the holiday season and winter hibernation, leave us with a positive note.
See, I was going to tell you that Michigan may get another Christmas present and have to redraw all of its districts within the first couple of months as people are running again. But we'll just leave with happy holidays and tell people to enjoy the season.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone, indeed. My thanks again to Russ White and the staff here at MSU Radio Studios for their support of this program. Join us again next month on State of the State.